Welcome everyone to this Whitlam Institute vodcast on the topic of young people and democracy, which is going to showcase some recent research that the Whitlam Institute has undertaken around this very important topic. I'd like to start by acknowledging that I am coming to you today from the lands of the Gadigal and Wongal people and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I'd also like to make a special welcome to any First Nations people who might be joining us for this conversation that we're having today. Let me start by introducing you all to our lead researcher on this research project, Dr. Philippa Collin, who is Associate Professor at the Institute for Culture and Society at Western Sydney University, and also the co-director of the Young and Resilient Research Centre. Welcome, Pip.
Hi, Leanne.
So the Whitlam Institute has been interested in this topic of young people and how they engage with their democracy for some time. And we started doing some research in this space back in 2008 that Dr. Collin was also involved with. We've also at the Whitlam Institute been running a writing competition that some of you may know, the What Matters writing competition, for over 10 years now. And that's been a really interesting insight for us into the issues that matter to young people and what they're concerned about. At the Institute, we are conducting policy research around two particular themes. The first of those is the future of Australian democracy, and the second theme is Australia in the world. Now, this project on young people and democracy for us fits firmly within both of those policy themes, and we're hoping to make a contribution in both spaces and drawing on both the international and the domestic space for how we think about this topic. For us at the Institute, we really feel like youth voice is so important to the range of challenges that we're facing as a nation and as a planet at the moment. And issues of intergenerational equity and what our children are going to inherit really require that young people are involved in the conversations and the policy decisions right now, not into the future when they're older. This is essential for us in terms of the future of Australian democracy. So it was partly for those reasons that we commissioned this research from Dr. Collin, because we recognised there was a need for ongoing research into how Australian youth engage with civics and how they engage with their political institutions in this country. Some of you may be aware that last year was the 30th anniversary of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. This is a really important landmark for a whole lot of reform and work that's gone into showcasing the importance of and the value of young people to our societies over the last 30 years. And last year also, the outgoing Australian Children's Commissioner, Megan Mitchell, submitted her first report on the situation of children in Australia. And it came up with a whole range of really interesting findings about what matters to young people, what they're concerned about. And one of the most interesting elements of the feedback that they gave to the Commissioner was around Article 12 of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And that article is about the importance of youth voice and listening to young people in how we make decisions and how we form policy and how we design our societies. So that's really another motivation for us in undertaking this research, to think about how we can enhance and pay more attention to what young people are saying about what matters to them. So Pip, if you're ready, I thought I'd ask you some questions about the research, and you can help us understand what it is and why it's important and what we might do with it.
Absolutely.
So maybe you could start us off by giving us a sense of why you are interested in doing this research with us, and in that context, your extensive background on this topic.
Okay, well, so as you mentioned, I was involved in some of the initial research that Whitlam Institute did around young people's relationship to democracy that we, undertook back in 2008. And I think really in the 10 years that it has passed since then, we have seen on one hand actually quite a lot of change in regards to how we think about children and young people's relationship to democracy and how it's discussed in the sort of popular domain. But on the other hand, some things haven't changed at all. We're still, debating whether or not children and young people should be taking part in active protests or strikes like the school strike for climate. whether or not they should have entitlements to vote, and indeed how our parliament hears from them. So I think these are not really new questions. They're almost as old as democracy itself. But I think, I have a very strong and enduring concern about the ways in which children and young people continue to be really the most politically disenfranchised in society. They don't have a vote. They're very poorly represented. They're the least represented, we could argue, in governments around the world. And there's this real disconnect, if you like, between young people's capabilities, interests and rights and their sort of representation in politics and their role in democracy. And, indeed, we already believe in this country that young people can work, that they can get married, that they, can be legally responsible for their actions as young as 10, in fact. In other contexts, young people can fight in wars, and can care for dependents. And so it doesn't really make sense to me that we continue to deem them incapable of being really meaningfully involved in the decisions about what kind of, society we live in.
What do you say to the argument that people quite often make that young people don't care about politics, that they're completely disengaged from politics and their democracy? Is that what you found in your research?
What the research is showing is that young people think about politics. So we see climate, First Nations justice, questions of gender, poverty, all sort of really intertwining in ways where they haven't been thought of in the past. When we look at how young people understand and act on these issues, they're often not single issues in the ways that we might traditionally have understood them. And I think that's something that's very interesting about this generation, is that they really are, I think, becoming much more aware of the complexities of these issues and their interrelationships. And on one hand, that's not really surprising because it's the most educated generation, we've ever had, and they have greater access to, information via the internet and digital technologies. And they're also becoming more aware of the kind of global nature of a lot of the kind of issues and topics that they might experience at a local level than ever before.
Pip, maybe this would be a good point for you to just briefly describe the scope of the research that you've done for us and what your main findings were.
Right. So as a researcher of young people's politics, I, have been one of those researchers that has consistently, done interviews or surveys and gone out and asked young people to come and share their perspectives with me. But it, dawned on me that, Whitlam Institute has this body of work where young people are already writing about the things that concern them, and that we needed to, this is an opportunity to be able to analyse and explore and understand, what are young people writing about? Does that change according to the age groups that they're, or the ages from which they're writing? How have those topics and concerns changed over time? And what can they tell us about the things that matter and how young people conceptualise these issues? One of the things that we're very lucky to have in Australia are some ongoing annual surveys and studies, such as the Mission Australia survey, which asks young people what issues matter to them. But we don't always understand when we ask young people, does the environment matter to you? Does education matter to you? Do the relationships or international issues matter to you? We don't know what they mean when they say yes. So we really wanted to look at this body of work and to understand in more detail what those issues look like from young people's perspective and how they've changed over the last 10 years. And
what did you discover, Pip? What did you discover that was maybe most surprising, or what was reinforced by the research for you?
We really do see a very wide range of topics. And I think what we were really interested in was how do those kind of come together in key themes or discourses that can help us to understand what really matters to young people. So, for instance, when young people write about people and life, the topics that they're addressing often include things like refugees, children in detention, recognition of Indigenous Australians, gender equity. They really grapple with these quite significant issues. And that did take us a little bit by surprise. I think because I had the pleasure of reading the finalists, I knew that there was a body of work within the competition that dealt with some of these, I guess, macro issues in quite a sophisticated way. But I think what we were very interested in was that right across the corpus, we see young people kind of going from their own personal experience and viewpoints to these bigger picture issues and more abstracted topics, and thinking about their role in responding to them, but also the role of other organisations, of governments, and our collective role in responding to them as well.
Yeah, I agree, Pip. I think that what I loved about the finalists' essays was the way these young people wrote from their own perspective, very, very real, frank assessments of their own lived experience, and were able to project that into a broader setting and think about policy responses to it. It's quite remarkable for people so young. We're going to be having a policy roundtable later this year in late November to kind of work through some of the research and the recommendations. But let's bring it back down to, it's great that we do the research. To what end? So what can we do with this? And what kind of ideas are out there for ways that we can engage with and encourage better appreciation for young people's voices in Australian society today?
So I think it's well worth us thinking about what kind of voice children and young people have to Parliament. It's not good enough from my point of view that anyone under the age of 18 who doesn't have a right to vote also doesn't have a multifaceted voice to Parliament. So of course we have a Children's Commissioner in this country, which is extremely important, and we've seen the past previous Children's Commissioner, Megan Mitchell, do an incredible job, but it is a huge job, and it, in my view, cannot be only undertaken by one body. So I think we need to think about how we deepen and extend that, and in the process support or build capacity across different levels of government, but also across the different areas of work that government undertakes to be more receptive and responsive to young people's views. So whether that is, extending the roles of the Minister for Youth, thinking really creatively with children and young people about how they would like to be more involved in the work of government. I think that's absolutely crucial. And thinking very seriously about the questions around who gets to be involved. We've had a few goes at this over the last 10 to 20 years in Australia. And we have some good models, extensive consultation, legislating what that looks like in terms of Parliament's response are very good places to start. But I think we really need to engage in a conversation that's cross-sector, that is with young people, and that involves policymakers, so we can think a little bit more broadly and a bit more creatively about what.
Yeah. Hopefully we can do that a bit in our policy roundtable too. Right. What do you think, Pip, about the idea that some people promote of decreasing the voting age as one way of engaging young Australians better?
Yeah, I'm in favour of it. So I think we should lower the vote. I think that it sends a very positive message to young people that they're valued, and that they can be and should be involved in the sort of institutional forms of politics. I think it would redress the relative disadvantage that they already face in terms of the ageing population that Australia has. You know, everything about our government at the moment is really geared towards the older part of our population, including having very poor representation of anybody under the age of 30 in the federal and state parliaments. And so I think reducing the voting age is important. I think it should also be, I mean, I think it could go lower than 16, which I know is a bit of a controversial view, but I do think that we should make it compulsory. I don't think we should impose the same, you know, fines and so on to anyone under the age of 18, because they are at an economic disadvantage. But, you know, I mean, at the end of the day, I think we don't take the vote away from anyone the older they get. We don't have tests for whether or not people are competent to be able to vote later in life. There is, I think, quite contestable research that, you know, people become more and more and more interested and engaged in politics over their lifetime. And I think we need to turn the question on its head and say, how can we better foster, you know, civic norms and values and a sense of being valued in democracy. And I think, sure, lowering the voting age is certainly one of those things that we can do.
So, you know, we run these civics and citizenship education workshops, and we asked this question to some of those young people participating in these workshops: should we lower the vote? And it's interesting because there's quite a split. A lot of young people think that would be fantastic, but there are some who say no, you shouldn't let people I know this age vote. And I think one of the issues that's been raised by some people who aren't very comfortable with reducing the voting age is that young people don't understand enough about our democracy and our system of government and the separation of powers, et cetera, to be able to fulfill it properly. So how important do you think civics education and potentially the idea of mandatory civics education for all Australian school children would be to helping them to be responsible citizens of our democracy?
So first of all, I think what we hear when we hear from young people that they don't believe that they should have the vote is an internalization of the very discourses to which they're continuously subject. So it's a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, I think. You can't on the one hand say young people don't have enough knowledge and they're not responsible enough and they're not capable enough to vote, and then say to them, do you think you should have the vote? I don't think it's surprising that a lot of them say no, but I also don't think that's a true reflection of whether or not they could or should, you know, be engaged in the electoral process. I do think that civics education is important, but I think we need to engineer our civics curriculum to better reflect the evolving civic and political norms that we see among young people. So if we want to, you know, and I think it's really useful to think this through, the concept of not democratic knowledge or education so much as how do we foster a democratic imaginary? How do we help young people not only to learn about how the system functions right now, but how could the system function into the future? And part of the reason for that is just recognising that there probably are a lot of flaws in our current democratic system, which are really exacerbated and becoming much more obvious in the context of, you know, like platform capitalism, if you like, you know, this incredible power that technology companies have as kind of the owners of these enormous data sets that are, you know, increasingly used with artificial intelligence, you know, that, you know, just are kind of really, I think, drawing into question the ways in which the role of the state, but also the ways in which power operates in society, the ways that decisions are made and so on. And these are big, complicated questions, and we need young people to be we need the whole population to be more equipped to understand and grapple with them. But certainly we need young people to become more equipped to be able to think about those complexities and to ask those questions about what do we want, what do we need our democracy to be able to, you know, respond to this. So yeah, I mean, like I think, of course, schools and education and civics and civic and political education, I think, is really important. And I think it's very important that we pursue this by thinking about how do we engineer that curriculum with young people, and also how do we ensure that curriculum supports their critical thinking capacities so that they can become more expansive in their thinking.
Well, look, thank you, Dr. Collin, for your time and for your research and for this huge contribution you've made to the Institute over many, many years now. We really appreciate it, and I'm very much looking forward to the roundtable, the policy roundtable we'll have later in the year. So thank you to you all for joining us as well. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation, and I'd encourage you to go and visit our website, whitlam.org, where you can find the research that we've been discussing today and more information about the What Matters writing competition, as well as the civics education program. So thanks a lot again, Pip. Goodbye.
My pleasure.